Well, hello everyone, and today we're in Chapter 8, which deals with secondary data. Now, as we saw last week, we looked at qualitative data, and much of what you're going to be needing when you engage in qualitative data is secondary data sources. So today, let's go ahead and take a look at what secondary data are all about, and we'll move on from there. Okay, let's get started with Chapter 8. Today we're going to be looking, and this week we're going to be looking at what we call secondary data. Now, last week we looked at qualitative research, and qualitative research involves the experiences of individuals or phenomenon. Now, part of the way that we can supplement or augment our research, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, is by doing secondary data research. So let's take a look at this important aspect of research in management and business. Now, if you notice in the book, you saw a little insert that talked about this company, Nielsen Claritas. Their company integrates business data from different sources and uses it to help other companies in their research and fact finding. And with, as you see here, the advent of large scale electronic information sources and the web, that has given us a broad range of options and access to information that was limited and restricted in the past. For instance, in my research, when I was in undergraduate school and we had to do papers, well, most of our papers required doing research, literature reviews, and that made me go to the library. We didn't have the web back then, not to the extent that we have it today. So I would go to the university. I would spend days in the library looking for information. They had a whole floor dedicated to journals, and I would spend most of the day there looking for journal articles, scholarly articles, and then I would go and do a card catalog search for relevant books so I could do my research. Today, I don't even have to leave the living room. I have everything that these universities have at the touch of a button and or scroll of a mouse. So today, because of electronic technology, information technology, and the web, I have access to an unlimited amount of resources. And businesses like Nielsen Claritas leverages this technology to be able to go and do research for companies so that they don't have to be bogged down with that process. Now, what is secondary data research? Well, secondary data is data gathered, and we have to remember data are plural. Data gathered and recorded by someone else prior to and for a purpose other than the current project. So let me give you an example. If I wanted to do a study on the Declaration of Independence, I could go to Washington and I could see it, but I may not be able to do much other than just look at it. Now, looking at the object or interviewing the subject, that would be considered primary data. But what about in the Declaration of Independence? I looked at books that talked about the Declaration of Independence. That's secondary data. I'm looking at the same object, but I'm looking at it from other sources. And it was someone else who gathered that data and recorded it for a purpose other than my project. Let's say, for instance, I wanted to take a look at a particular section of the Declaration of Independence. And I find a book that an author wrote about the whole entirety of the Declaration of Independence. That person might have written it for a different purpose than what I'm using my research for. So secondary data talks about the original, or talks about the object of your research, but also it is written not necessarily for the same purpose as your research. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages. As you see here, advantages is that the data are available. That means all it takes is just a search in the library or a search online using a keyword to be able to find secondary data, and it should be readily available. It is faster and less expensive than acquiring primary data. Primary data require maybe you going and interviewing and going to see the object, to observe and so forth. That can be slow and it can be expensive. So secondary data allow you to be able to get access faster and without consuming a lot of expenses. It requires no access to the subject. Again, I can study the Declaration of Independence and become an expert in it without ever having to see it personally. It's inexpensive, and then government data are often free. Now, there are, and that's not necessarily true in all cases. Now, there are some journals, and when you do secondary data research on journals, using journals, oftentimes to access that journal article, they want you to pay for it. If you're not already a member of that journal or institution, and normally the average cost of a journal article, let's say for instance the efficacy of the Declaration of Independence in modern day Western culture, and you want to access that article because you want to use it in your research, well, the average article is going to cost you about $25. Now, it's yours after that, but oftentimes they want to charge you. Most scholarly journals like CH8 and sometimes American Psychological Association and these institutions and Harvard, they are going to charge you because you're not a member of that society or institution. They're going to charge you a fee to be able to access that article. And again, it can be upwards of $25. Now, what I used to do is go to the university, such as here, the University of Memphis. On the first floor of their library, they have a database, and you can access many of the journals that you might not have access to here at Mid-America. Now, my PhD is in education, and this being a seminary, they didn't have a whole lot of information regarding the things that I wanted to study. So I had to go to the University of Memphis and find the journals articles that were pertinent to my major and my study, but it was free. So that would be some kind of advice for you before you go and spend money. Try a major university if you're local here in Memphis or wherever you may be. Check to see if you can access their databases, because they have access to the journals that we may not have access to. And also, too, an advantage, it may provide information otherwise not accessible. So there may be areas like, let's say, for instance, they are doing a renovation of the Declaration of Independence. Every once in a while, they will take it away and make sure they'll study the document to make sure there are no undue damages to that document just by being there and because of its age. And my luck is probably, I would probably get there, and that would be the time that they're doing maintenance on the document. So I might not have access to it or be able to look at it. So it often provides you with access that you might not normally have if you went to the source yourself. Now, disadvantages. Well, the validity. You are at the mercy of the writer. And that's why I encourage all of my students, when you do scholarly research, it needs to come from scholarly sources, peer-reviewed journals. That means that these articles have been scrutinized by peers in that profession. So before it's published, it's going to be evaluated for its quality and validity and reliability. Also, the data may not be consistent with the needs. If I wanted to see the efficacy of the Declaration of Independence in modern day Western culture, and I pick up a journal article on the durability of the paper that the Declaration of Independence was written on, that's not going to be consistent with my needs. And oftentimes you find yourself in areas where the title of the journal or the article or the source may seem to provide what you need, but when you read it, it's really something different. So you run that risk. Also, inappropriate units of measures. So they may look, and there has been fraud that has taken place in academia, where people's research, as you're looking at the secondary research, their measurements may not be right. They may bias their conclusions and so forth, or even their model. So you run the risk of that. And also too old. One of the requirements that I had for my PhD was that I needed to find references, research data that were under 5 years old. So that kind of makes sure that you are looking at contemporary data and you're not looking at something back from the 1800s that's antiquated and no longer relevant. Now, the book talks about data conversion, and that's the process of changing the original form of the data to a format suitable to achieve the research objective. And the book talks about maybe they did a study on the volume of sales of bananas, maybe, or how much it cost, or how long it took to produce it. You may have to convert that data into, and I believe they talked about dollars per pounds. So the information that you get, you may have to transform it into something that you can use that's suitable for your research. Cross-checks, that's just a matter of comparing data among sources. If you're doing a study on the Declaration of Independence, you would take maybe one author and take a look at another author or another researcher and see if there are similarities. If there are no similarities and they contradict each other, then you may have an issue there, and you may have to dig deeper to find multiple sources to see from the totality of the researchers who is correct in their research. Now, Exhibit 8.1 is just evaluating secondary data. These are decision trees, or a decision tree, so I'll let you guys take a look at that and just kind of get an idea of what you need to go through, the checks and balances, if you are going to evaluate the validity and the value of a secondary data source. Now, what are some of the objectives? Well, you want to engage in fact-finding. That's what research is all about. You're gathering data to find facts to either support or refute or support your assertions or hypotheses. Now, in business, you can take a look at identifying consumer behavior for a product category. For instance, how often do people or do the consumer buy tennis shoes? That you may find or the age group of people who normally buy a certain brand of tennis shoes, let's say Nike, whatever. And you can do that by doing secondary research, trend analysis, and that's just market tracking. You're looking for trends. For instance, you're going to sell more chocolate probably during Valentine's Day, during the month of probably the end of January to the beginning of February. You're going to sell more chocolate, and you can go back and look at data that support that assertion or refute it. Environmental scanning, and that's information gathered and fact-finding that is designed to detect environmental changes in their initial stages of development. So here you're looking at changes in the environment. For instance, today, people are, I'm assuming, getting away from the idea of the traditional automobile. Today, many people are becoming more environmentally conscious, so they are buying and maybe being attracted to electrical cars and so forth. So that would be an environmental change. Secondary research shows that services and values are most important to consumers, and they looked here at these shopping centers and so forth and found that. So you can find out what is important for the consumer before you make your strategic decisions within a company. Now, typical objectives, again, when we take a look at that, you're not looking just at research, fact-finding, but you're also looking at maybe model building. And model building is just building, as it says, models for your research. You estimate the market potential for geographic areas, forecast sales, and do an analysis of trade and areas and sites and so forth. Now, the next slide will probably give you a better indication or better tell you what we're talking about with model building. So let's move on to it. Now, this would be a model. If you see here, you have some indicators at the top. You have population, you have per capita shoe sales, you have local market potential, square feet of retail space used to sell the shoes, an index of retail saturation. So what if I wanted to look at the index of retail saturation? You can build a model off of these indicators, and that would give you the index of retail saturation. What would I want to look at, first of all? The local market potential. So here we see the local market potential. That's demand. And then I would divide it by local market retail space. There's the retail space right there. So I would take the 14,249 and put it down here. That's 14,249,000. And I would divide it by the square footage, which is 94,000 square foot, and that would give me the total of 152. Now, what does 152 mean? I have no idea, because the data will mean something to the person who's creating it. But you can create models from all of this, and you can pretty much study whatever you want to study using secondary data. Well, as you can see, secondary data are sources that you can use that give you a wealth of information, much more than what was accessible back 10, 15, maybe even 20 years ago. So today we took a look at some of the basics of secondary data. Tomorrow we're going to go a little bit more in depth in it. So have a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow.